So I was talking to a founder earlier today, and we are talking about the raise I'm helping him with, where we've sent his deck and we've sent the key message and the opening email to a number of investors, quite a few investors, and we've only had one response asking a certain question. And the founder said, "Oh, that's interesting. We only ever had one investor answering or asking that specific question. So the key message, we must be getting the key message through." And I said, "No, hang on a second. We've got to be very, very careful of what's called survivorship bias, which is when you look at a subset of the available data that you have and you make an assumption based just on that subset." So in this case, he was looking at the one investor who asked the one question. He made a conclusion that that must be the only investor who has that one question, and extrapolated to the entire data set by meaning we must have the message pretty much okay if it's just the one investor. And I pushed back. I said, well, actually, probably a lot of other investors have the same question, but they're not actually bothering to respond or ask it because they've got too much else on. They're getting deals done before the summer or whatever it is. And survivorship bias comes from the Second World War, where you had RAF flight engineers, when they had bombers and fighters landing from sorties over enemy territory, what they would do, they would map where on the airplane the planes had taken shrapnel or had taken fire, assuming that those areas are the areas that best represent areas they could armor or increase the level of protection in those areas. And by doing so, they figured, well, this is where these planes are getting shot. Let's fortify and increase the level of armor and protection in those areas, and therefore will increase the levels of planes that are coming back and that are surviving. And they did so. And they were very excited to look at that data and plot that data, and it saw that it made not a difference. And the reason why is pretty obvious when you think about it, but they were looking purely at the planes that were making it back. And they were looking at the areas of those planes that had made it back that had taken enemy fire and assumed, well, if we fix the problem in those areas and we fortify those areas, it'll only be better. But they were missing the fact that actually they're the planes that made it back. They probably don't need much in the way of fortifying. But in reality, it's those planes that didn't make it back. So those areas of the plane that they were mapping onto models of the airplane that they weren't able to see, they're probably the areas that needed more fortifying. And it's a very, very powerful example. One I was taking advantage of a teaching moment to share with my eldest son today, to really look at survivorship bias and making sure that as founders, very, very careful not to extrapolate from a small sample, from a single question or a small number of questions, and assume that they're the only investors who have those questions. But you should really make the assumption that other investors have the same questions as well, but for whatever reason, they're not bothering to ask that question. Important to keep in mind, and hopefully that can help with the raise that you're going through right now.